My name is Kelly Greenlee. I'm the Community Outreach Librarian here at Prince Memorial Library. This is Bea Johnson from EcoMaine. This is the fourth in a series of talks she has done. We are going to, well, maybe I shouldn't say that.
What?
Should I talk about what we're going to be scheduling sometime soon?
Oh, no, you can talk about that. Yeah, we'll end up on the calendar at some point.
We haven't figured it out yet, but we're going to try and organize a tour of EcoMaine. So people can sign up, So people can sign up through the library and we can organize a time to go down there and we would all meet at EcoMaine and participate in the tour. But we haven't set the date yet, we haven't figured that out yet, so stay tuned.
If anyone has suggestions on your times, maybe you can send them along.
Yeah, if you get the library newsletter, that's a great way to find out the information as it happens. So if you want to sign up for the library newsletter, see me afterward and I'm happy to do that for you. Bea Johnson, thanks.
Also, for those who have little ones in their lives, we do have a paper, I believe we're doing paper making or bead making. We're doing an upcycling craft with kids in June. It's an after school programming. I think it's at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday, so right after school. So just heads up on that. All right. Well, thank you all for coming this morning. Beautiful day out there. I hope everyone's heads. We kind of pushed this one for May because we figured people might start thinking about compost and gardening. And everyone's outside today on my way through, so I think that it's fitting here. So today we're going to talk about composting and food scrap diversion. The importance of this, simple ways that you can do it yourself if you're not already doing it. And yeah, benefits of it. A little bit about EcoMaine. I am an environmental educator with EcoMaine. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're owned by 20 Maine communities, one of which is Cumberland. We also have North Yarmouth, Portland. We were started by Portland, South Portland, Scarborough, and Cape Elizabeth. We service basically the greater Portland area, and we also service about 1/3 of Maine's waste by volume as well. We go all the way to Western Maine. We have a few towns up towards MDI. So we're really widespread, and we also have 2 towns on the New Hampshire seacoast as well. So we're all across. We're partnering with over 73 communities across Maine and New Hampshire. This is for municipal solid waste or trash disposal that we're processing through our waste to energy facilities, as well as recycling that goes through our single sort recycling facility. I do see some familiar faces that were at previous ones, so I won't continue to talk too much about who EcoMaine is. But we have these 3 facilities. This right here is our waste to energy facility. That's where we're accepting about 175,000 tons of trash every single year. We did some great virtual tours. I think the first session that we did, it's on YouTube and through the web. If you're interested, you can probably reach out. I think is it connected through the library?
It's on the library website,
yeah. But it's a virtual tour of our facilities, so you can see what is happening at our single sort recycling facility as well as our waste to energy facility. And we also accept about 35,000 tons of recyclables. And this right here is our ash fill. That's where the ash byproduct from our waste to energy facility resides. It's about 2 miles down the street from our facility, which is in the Jetport area of Portland. Not only that, but we're also we partner with AgriCycle for organics compilation at our facility. So we're going to talk a lot more about what AgriCycle does in their anaerobic digestion facility. These are all of those communities that we work in. You can see all the way up Lemoyne. We have some Blue Hill, Surrey area down to New Hampshire. So we're covering a good portion of our state for waste management. Our mission is providing comprehensive long-term solid waste solutions in a safe, environmentally responsible, and economically sound manner. We like to follow the waste hierarchy, the solid waste hierarchy. This is set in place by the EPA and the DEP, which starts with reduce, reuse, and recycle. And today we're going to be talking a lot about compost and digestion and keeping organic material out of our trash and waste stream and out of the recycling stream. It does get in there too sometimes. So making sure that we're diverting those organics to be environmental stewards, as well as keep costs down. That's another thing to think about. So landfills, there's a lot of problems with them. Probably the biggest being that we are running out of landfill space. So this is definitely a looming concern. It's occupying valuable land. They release really harmful methane gases into the atmosphere. This is often because of food and other organic material that is sitting in this landfill, integrating without the presence of oxygen or anaerobically, which is creating this methane. They can harm nearby watersheds, costs a lot of money to upkeep. A lot of people don't know, but even after a landfill closes, you still need to maintain it. So they're very expensive. And before waste to energy, recycling, anaerobic digestion, all waste was taking up space in landfills. So it's really important that we're mindful of this because a lot of our waste is actually organic material. It's something around, we have a new waste study coming out, but it's going to be anywhere probably from 25 to 35% is kind of the slot that we're imagining. So at EcoMaine, we started in 1976 to 1978 with our waste management. That was Portland, South Portland, Scarborough, and Cape Elizabeth that joined together to establish regional waste systems. That was our original name. This was just 240 acres of jointly owned landfill. So once again, that's where all that organic material that was going in the trash was this jointly owned landfill that we started at back in the 70s. In the 80s, we grew to those 20 municipalities. We built our waste to energy facility. This was in the construction period here. This was to reduce the landfilling by processing our materials before it was going to landfill. And then we were able to generate renewable energy. In the 90s, we started taking recyclables to keep those out of the stream. And then in 2006, that's when Regional Waste Systems established under EcoMaine, and we created Maine's first single-sort recycling program. And then in 2016 is when we started our program with AgriCycle Energy for anaerobic digestion for organic material. So why is food scrap diversion worth the trouble? Food waste causes about 58% of methane emissions from municipal solid waste landfills. So a big reason why we're seeing these high amounts of methane, which is significantly more potent than carbon dioxide coming off of our landfills, is from the organics that are ending up there. This is, 21 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And not only that, but food waste weighs a lot, right? I'm sure everyone's familiar with throwing that food waste in the trash bag. If you empty out your fridge, you're gonna have a really heavy trash bag. All of that wet waste is going to cost more because you're paying for tonnage, right, when it comes to our facility. So it costs a lot more to have all of that organics in our trash bags. It also is stinky. You might have to take it out more. And for towns that pay per trash bag, that's a big deal. So there's that. Also, wet waste doesn't really burn that well, which is where our material is going. So if it goes into your trash, it will come to our waste to energy facility. When we have a lot of wet waste, it doesn't burn well, so it's not going to burn efficiently, which allows us to generate the electricity, as well as have full combustion of our materials and to process properly. So that's just yet another reason. But this also happens when we get wet weather, cold weather, and snow that can get into the trash bins. We can get that wet waste. But organics makes up a huge portion of what is actually in our trash. This is from an old waste study. This is 2011. Believe it or not, it's our most recent waste study that we have data for. They just performed a new one, the Department of Environmental Protection, this year. But we are still waiting on results from that one, which will show our updated compost amounts as well as our other types of materials within our waste. So right here, this is the 2011 study that they did. This was from the Mitchell Center for Sustainable Solutions at the University of Maine. They looked at our trash and sorted it into all of these different categories and found that about 43.3% was organics. And of that organic material, about 38.4% of it was compostable organic material. And then 21% was recyclable, so that's all materials that could have gone to a recycling stream rather than our trash stream. And of what we're putting in our waste, which is 175,000 tons a year, only 39% of that was actually deemed waste and stuff so this is a huge portion of our materials that we could keep out of the landfill by recycling and composting. Right here you can see a further breakdown. Paper makes up a big amount. Some of that is going to, in the new study, they have food contaminated paper and then regular paper that was not food contaminated and perfectly fine to go in a recycling bin, cardboard that might have been contaminated versus non. So they've got, I think they have 88 categories that they sorted in our new study. So in the next coming months, we should probably have a new updated version of this. But yeah, so this is what our trash is actually looking like. There's a lot of material that we can actually keep out. So we want to make sure we're separating useful items, donating those, organics, and recyclables. And what's actually going into our trash should be those non-recyclable packaging materials, which hopefully there's a lot of policy right now, EPR for packaging. I've talked about it a little bit within some of my other discussions that I've had here, but it is current policy that will hopefully have producers creating more sustainable packaging because it's incentivizing that for the producers. So hopefully we'll see some better packaging that falls into this category of organics and recyclable in the future. But for right now, non-recyclable packaging would be waste, as well as any kind of biohazards would go into our trash. But the other types of material can continue to be sorted out and should be getting sorted out. Right here is our food recovery hierarchy. This is an EPA food recovery hierarchy. It goes in order from most preferred to least preferred, starting with source reduction. So this is really just starting at the beginning of our food waste problem. We're talking about purchasing less food, producing, not having as much waste in the production of food. Then we want to feed hungry people, so donating food if we have excess rather than letting that go bad, making sure we're finding ways that we can donate that kind of food to people because there's a lot of people who are food insecure within our community. So making sure that we're donating extra food to food banks, soup kitchens, shelters, other types of programs. Even I know there's some programs where you can just offer it, some Facebook groups even I've heard of just like offering fresh meals to people. Some people can't cook their own meals and stuff like that. So there's definitely an outlet for that. Above industrial uses and composting is actually feeding animals. So if you have any chickens at home, any other animals, pigs is a big one, or know of pig farmers around, that's actually a way that you can divert those food scraps to animals that could potentially eat them and benefit from it. And then we have industrial use and composting where we are, so industrial uses would be providing waste oils for rendering and fuel conversion and food scraps for digestion to recover energy. So we're talking about anaerobic digestion. And then we have composting to create nutrient-rich soil amendments. This is all great to keep it out. Last resort is going to be landfill. Once it goes to landfill, there's nothing productive. It's only going to be a negative problem that we have. So we're going to look at composting from two different perspectives today. We're going to really hone in on the composting, and we're going to be right in here where we're going to talk about diverting food from landfill and reducing the need for fossil fuels. That would be through anaerobic digestion, as well as creating soil, which is sequestering emissions. So starting with the backyard basics, so how we are composting in your backyard. Does anyone here compost in their backyard? Okay, so a lot of people in this room. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about who's had successful backyard composting piles. Anyone's? A few less hands? Okay. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit more maybe about how you could supplement your backyard compost pile because it can be a challenge, and the different things that are suggested to create that healthy soil. And then we'll talk a little bit who here utilizes the compost drop-off within your town. Okay, yeah, we'll talk about compost drop-off sites. And whether we know it or not, when we're dropping things off in compost in restaurants and other food service locations, you might be using an industrial composting site. Hannaford and other grocery stores use anaerobic digestion for a lot of their wasted food materials, so foods that go bad that are packaged. So we're all at some point, also using this anaerobic digestion or surrounded by it. So for backyard basics, backyard composting can really vary in complexity, and it really depends on what you're interested in. But a big reason why people are backyard composting is for the soil. Does anyone who has a backyard compost here, do you use it in your gardens? All right, so we're using it as a soil amendment to grow our own food. So this is usually the big driver. It's, you're able to take those food scraps and create something that's useful to you when spring comes around and you have your gardens to supplement for nutrition. So some of the backyard composting tips is that you should pick or build a bin that's about 1 cubic yard. That's the suggestion. And you want to place it in a well-drained and level spot, so you don't want a bunch of water just kind of concentrating. You don't want this compost pile to be getting saturated in liquids. We're going to talk about moisture content in a second too. This could be stationary, this can be tumbler. Does anyone use tumblers? Yeah, so those ones you're going to be turning. And then there's also vermicomposting, which we'll talk about a little bit. I'm no expert in vermicomposting, but that's when we can use it. I know a lot of people will use this in apartments where they don't maybe have the backyard space, because you can do it in just a storage container, basically, with worms. But these are all resources as well that are available through our state. We have the Maine DEP. They have a great composting network as well. Mark King, who works with the state, is fantastic. He runs the Maine Compost School, which is a week-long, intensive program on how to compost, the benefits of composting. He's really our guru. There is MOFGA as well, Maine Organics Farmers and Gardeners Association. Wormmania does a lot of the vermicomposting, and mainly worm bins. So there's a lot of vermicomposting resources as well. For our backyards, these are the types of materials we should be considering. There's going to be different things that should go into our backyard bins. The big thing that we're trying to avoid is putting oils, meats, fish, bones, grease, stuff like that. We don't want that in our backyard bins. It's going to attract animals. This is also stuff that sometimes has a harder time breaking down if you don't have the high heats that an industrial composting site would. The big things that are great are leaves when we rake our backyards, the brush, so the sticks. Those are really great for aeration, which a lot of people actually don't know. Same with pizza boxes. You can rip those up and put those in there. Same thing, it allows to kind of aerate the materials. Eggshells for calcium, bananas, any other organic materials, food scraps, coffee grinds. I know there's some concerns about what type of napkins. I suggest and paper products you want in your backyard composting. I do suggest you look at labels for that, because some paper plates and stuff like that might have plastic coatings on it. Some of them might have, they might be bioplastics, things like that, that might not break down as well. Even compostable bags and stuff like that, up to you probably, unless you have a really high heat, really good backyard compost and you've seen those break down prior, we usually suggest you do not put those types of things in your backyard compost. So, when you're talking about your backyard compost, we want to make sure we have nutrient balance, particle size is the proper particle size. We don't have compost that's too wet or too dry, so moisture content is a big one. It needs that oxygen flow. We don't want it just condensing upon itself, so there's no flow of oxygen through it. That's why those tumblers are great, because you can move it a lot and add material in. And you also want to make sure it's reaching high enough temperatures that all of that material is degrading. This is what we suggest for our nitrogen balance. So we're going to need carbon materials and nitrogen materials. Those carbon materials are the things we're going to call the browns. So it should be actually 2/3 brown material, which is something, this is often the demise of a lot of compost piles is it's all the kitchen scraps, and that's all that's going into that pile. You really need more of the carbon materials than you have your kitchen scraps. So that's going to be aged hay, garden leaves, lawn clippings, sticks, things like that, brush, all that kind of stuff can be added in as your carbon or your browns. And then the nitrogen-rich material are going to be the vegetables. This is going to be some of the garden clippings and stuff like that. So this is weeds. What else do we have in here? Flowers, your tea bags. All of that stuff is going to be that nitrogen-rich material. And then the carbon materials, those more dead sticks. Those are I always think fall, like when you're cleaning up in the fall, that kind of stuff. And you're going to want to layer it. So you have the browns and the greens, and the browns and the greens. If you're doing it in a tumbler, kind of mentally be thinking about this. So you put your browns and your greens, and you have that proportion rather than just having a bunch of food that's going into the tumbler. This is going to allow for a lot of the things I'm about to talk about, but particle size. So the more surface area that there is in your particle sizes, so if you don't have teeny, teeny, tiny particles of compost, the bigger, like chipped, grinded, and shredded materials, like wood chips here, this kind of stuff, that allows for more space for microorganisms. So the smaller particles will produce a more homogeneous mix, but too small is not enough space. So you don't want things that are so small that air can't get through and those microorganisms can't thrive. So we always say, like chipped, grinded, and shredded are about the proper size for what you want for your materials going into a compost. And then moisture content. So these microorganisms that are breaking down all of this material need moisture to survive in the compost. The materials that you use in your compost might have some moisture as well. But if you have a really dry compost, you might need to start adding some of these more wet items, so the food scraps. You might even have to add water itself. Not too much though, we say 45 to 60% moisture content. So this is an example right here. You can squeeze it in your hand and you want it to be kind of like this. If it packs up, it might be a little too wet and you want to add more of those browns in to dry it out. Start turning it a little bit more and maybe lay off some of the wetter kitchen scraps and stuff like that. So 45 to 60% moisture content. And if it's too wet, add those browns. And you also don't want it to be like, sometimes it's so wet that it's literally dripping like water. Obviously, if it rains, that's one thing. But if it's not draining after that and it's just holding all of that, you want it to add those browns to make sure it's not as wet. Oxygen's also incredibly important when we're talking about this. That's why there's problems with landfills, is they often don't have the oxygen present. So you have the anaerobic breakdown, anaerobic meaning without oxygen, of that organic material, and this can create methane. So that is not what we're looking for. So oxygen is so important when we're talking about compost piles. Turning your pile regularly, building piles on raised twigs and branches is super important so it can get bottom aeration, and also not doing this in a closed off container. So you don't want, unless you're tumbling it and it's specific to composting, I would say not just a barrel, or if you do have a barrel, put holes in the sides so it can breathe. The oxygen is super important when we're talking about compost breakdown. Adding shredded paper and wood chips allow that air. They make the particle size a little bigger, right? So it allows that air to go through the compost, and this will allow for faster decomposition than those anaerobic conditions when it gets compacted. Turning also adds or you lose moisture during turning. So also if you have a wet compost, it might be a good time to start turning it more to add that oxygen. And then temperature. So it's best does anyone take the temperature of their compost pile that's in here? I don't think many people do it in their backyards. But between 130 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit in backyard compost is great. You want to turn piles before they reach 160 to cool them. So you don't really want them to get so hot because you can start, they can get too hot for the microbiome that they're creating. So you really need to be aware of that, turning it if need be. But they do need those warm temperatures to support the microbiome and destroy pathogens and weeds within the piles. So you want it to be high, but you don't want just like dirt sitting there and not breathe, because then nothing's actually happening. So it needs to be high, but you don't want it to get so high that you're starting to kill off some of the good microbiome that's going on in it. So to cover those, it's the nutrient balance. So we're talking about the 2/3 brown carbon material to the 1/3 green nitrogen material. We want proper particle size. So we have to improve the porosity or the airflow going on in a better mixture. So we're gonna mow, grind, chip, or shred pieces so they're a better particle size than big, large pieces that might take longer to break down. You want the proper moisture content. So this will require for nutrients to flow through the pile. You can add extra water if you really need to. We probably won't here in Maine just because we do get regular rainfall. But in areas where it's dry, sometimes you have to add that. And then oxygen flow, making sure that you're incorporating oxygen from microorganisms by turning and mixing the pile, but we don't want to overturn it. So it's really just being in tune to what you think your compost pile needs. And then I also feel like you can really overthink it too. There's that. So don't stress too much about any of it. Because it can really become overwhelming, and sometimes people overthink it and they're like, I just give up because nothing makes sense. But then there's vermicomposting. This is a great way to get started. This is just a really simple bin that they have where you can just take a storage container and drill holes in. Once again, you need that air. You add in your different materials and you put in the worms. So it needs, they say, keep at least 3 inches of shredded newspaper on top. You want to bury food underneath the worms and the bedding. And so when you put the scraps in, they go in down through the corners. And you alternate where it goes to keep the worms kind of moving. This is better if you have less materials that you're dealing with, if you're sometimes in a smaller space, if you don't want to deal with pests in a big pile, but you probably will have less. I mean, you have only a certain amount of material that you're managing at all times. Bottom, don't overfeed them too. And this website, Wormania, they have all sorts of great information on vermicomposting. So, industrial composting. Some people utilize compost drop-off locations. There are some fairly locally. My understanding is there is no compost drop-off in Cumberland. Is that correct?
There is in North Yarmouth.
There is in North Yarmouth, and there's in Falmouth, but there's no Cumberland drop-off specific.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. We'll talk about that's what I figured from my research as well. So, but what's the deal with industrial composting? What's actually happening? Why can I put different materials in there than I can in my backyard? What's the difference? The big thing is the overarching goal is to divert tonnage from landfills. So that is why they developed this industrial composting strategy, was to take all of that material. We have 30% of our trash is organic material, so how can we make it easier to accept all of that material? How can we do this on a larger scale? And this is often through anaerobic digestion, this is the facility that we partner with. This is AgriCycle right here. And then Garbage to Garden, which does it a different way. So, and sometimes Garbage to Garden's materials come to us, but that's a whole different story for anaerobic digestion. But Garbage to Garden is doing large industrial windrows. Whereas AgriCycle has these anaerobic digesters where they make like a slurry and create a renewable energy from that. So this is what those drop-off sites look like. There's one in Falmouth by the ice rink and Walmart, so the Casco Bay Arena. I know it depends on what side of Cumberland you live on. There's also one in North Yarmouth. I believe it's right. Is it Town Hall? Yeah, and it's a public drop-off. There's also one not far from here at the community fields in Falmouth. So if you take, Wynn Road, I think it's Wynn Road, out towards Falmouth, right at the community fields there, is a public drop-off site as well. So they're around, they're within, 10 minutes of driving.
Are there any in Portland? Sorry.
Yep, there's some in Portland as well. There's a lot in Portland, actually. Those ones are at almost all of their public community gardens. So I think there's one, I can get you more specific information. Do you live in Portland?
My daughter does.
Okay. Where in Portland?
She's going to be moving to something with an HSA, so
Okay.
she's not sure if they're going to allow.
A pile?
She uses garbage to gardens right now.
Oh, okay.
So, but she would like to continue composting.
Where in the
She's
Portland?
going Back Bay.
Back Bay. Okay, so I know Evergreen Cemetery, they have a community garden right next to that has a drop-off site.
Okay.
That's probably not too far. She's in Back Bay. They might even have one at Payson Park. I have to double check. It's on the Portland Town website, though. They have the drop-off sites. Once again, public. And I believe you can request compost. Like you can go and purchase compost from Garbage to Gardens as well. I don't know. I don't believe you get it for free, but they do have, you can purchase the material still. So industrial composting basically accepts all food waste, including the smelly stuff that we don't necessarily want in our backyards. So even if you are backyard composting too and you want to get rid of those, the food, the oils, all of that stuff, you can always use a drop-off site as well, if you're willing to do so. So they are around, and these industrial composting sites can take more materials. There are windrow style piles. These are kept at about 130 degrees, and that's using energy produced by heat-loving bacteria called thermophiles. This is what Garbage to Garden uses. Garbage to Garden also accepts in some of their materials, it depends on if you do curbside or not. Sometimes, like for, I don't believe they take much for PLA plastics or compostable plastics. They are specific which ones you can use, but sometimes they'll allow for the bags in their compost bins. Do people use those for Garbage to Garden here? Anyone using Garbage to Garden? Do you use the bags for compost? Some people do, and I believe it is totally fine with theirs. But I know they do have separate piles as well for event waste that has more of the compostable ware. So the cups, the plates, all of that stuff, that's not becoming the organic compost. So they have two different types of piles. But this is maintained by tractors and equipments. And basically the heat breaks down some of those bioplastics. However, the materials, those kinds of materials don't add any nutrients to the pile. So we don't want just those bioplastics. You need organic material as well. Industrial composting, however, is totally different. This would be anaerobic digestion. So process of microorganisms breaking down organic material in the absence of oxygen. So this is kind of using the concept, if trash goes to a landfill and breaks down without the presence of oxygen, it creates that methane. You can capture the gas as well. So what they're doing is they have cow manure and they mix it with food scraps, and this all breaks down in these digesters right here, and they capture methane and other gases that are created in this process, and they combust them to create electricity, heat, and then they're also creating a fertilizer that they use on their own crops. The biogas can also be processed into renewable natural gas and transported transportation fuels. This is going to drive me crazy if it keeps popping up. So basically, you can bring it to these drop-offs. Maybe some of you use these kind of compost buckets that you just put out on your curb. Garbage to Garden does service Cumberland. So if you're interested in having a curbside service, that's available in the town. But basically, they take that and they bring it to their facility, which is pretty complex. But basically there's the farm. It's on the Fogler farm up in Exeter, Maine. So it's about 2 hours north of here where all of this goes on. Exeter, Dexter area, kind of northwest of Bangor, I believe. The cow manure gets added with the food waste that's collected from homes and businesses. This can also be packaged food waste. That's a big difference here. So packaged food waste, because it goes through a depackaging process, is accepted at these industrial composters. So they have this big depackaging process where they shred it all down, and that packaging material actually comes back to EcoMaine, where we then take the packaging and it goes to our waste to energy facility. So that's kind of how our partnership works, is we're used as a consolidation point for the southern Maine region for all the grocery stores that are using this. This is big when we talk commercial, because of all of the food that expires that they're not going to sit there and unpack. I remember we had those storms last year around Easter, and I went into the food, I was doing a tour and we went into the food waste bunker, and there were full grocery stores that had to empty all of their aisles. So there were hams upon hams in this compost pile that were all wrapped in that plastic, right, shrink wrapped. And that was all able to get anaerobically digested rather than going to landfill because of this depackaging process. So they basically shred it all down, that plastic gets separated, and then the rest goes through our anaerobic digester. So it keeps a lot out of landfill that otherwise they would have just thrown that in trash, because they're not going to sit there. They don't have the staff to do that, to unwrap all of their stuff.
Would that be like your ketchup bottles and things like that?
Ideally, it's only going to be for the producers that, or the companies that really can't take the time to do it. Ideally, we don't, it's best to do it yourself, to squeeze out the ketchup bottles if possible into your compost and stuff like that. So house to house, if you are using an the agricycle company, it's best to be separating it, doing your best to keep the food separate. That makes sure that the most amount of food waste is organically or processed through anaerobic digestion, rather than some of it getting lost in the packaging. So making sure we can recover the most possible. But then this basically goes through their anaerobic digestion process, where the microorganisms reproduce by feeding on organic matter in the digesters, and that's creating the biogas. The biogas becomes fuel for the system through a combined heat and power unit, so they're creating electricity through this process. Excess electricity that they don't use on site is sold back to the grid, which reduces the fossil fuel consumption and carbon dioxide emissions, which is pretty neat. Then we have all this slurry, right? So they captured the gases, but there's still all that stuff in the digester, the digestate. So that digestate goes to a bioseparator. It's this big machine where they're able to recover the solid. They separate the solid and the liquid product from this digester. The liquid material is used as a natural crop fertilizer, so they use it on their farm directly. And then the pulp, or the fibrous material that was in that digester, that is actually dried out, and they're able to use it as animal bedding on their farm. So they use it for the cows, which is pretty neat. So it goes right back into the system. The cows are sleeping on that, and they end up using, their waste goes towards the anaerobic digestion process. So it's this really cool symbiotic relationship they've got going on this farm. There's a few of these across the state, but a lot of the times they're not just, this one's the only one that accepts organic food material. A lot of the time they just will work on cow farms for the manure and do the same things. But this one's starting to incorporate that food waste, and I think we're going to see a lot more of the facilities starting to accept that as people are more and more interested in diverting their food waste. This is the do's and don'ts of what can go in this type of composting bin. So they're gonna be able to take the dairy, the meat, the bones, the greases, condiments. You mentioned ketchup, right? That kind of stuff. This is all good packaged food, so damaged or outdated food, and products still in packaging from stores. That's gonna be a big thing. The don'ts, this also goes for backyard composting. Another big one, I don't know if I notified this one, but actually dog animal poop, that's not stuff you want in your compost piles. A lot of people don't know that. But you can just have a lot of bacteria. I think other types, if your pet is on medicine, there's all sorts of different problems going on there. It's also why it's important to pick up after your pets. So, but they can also, they don't want empty cardboard and plastic. So that's where I was saying it doesn't, to make sure that we're doing our best. If you work with a company called like this, it's best to depackage it yourself if possible, to limit the amount of packaging that they're dealing with. Yeah, but masks, other stuff, medicines, diapers, those are all plastic containing materials that should not be going into your compost. We've talked a little bit about compostable packaging previously. Compostable packaging can be a little challenging, where not all packaging is necessarily truthfully marketed. So these are the ones, if you ever see these types of logos, these are the ones that are good. These are the ones that very much mean compostable BPI certification. Those ones are okay to be putting into those industrial composting, but there's a lot of other types of packaging that's just kind of slapped on there. They'll put a logo and it doesn't really mean, it doesn't hold much for substance. It might just be, sustainable, or a leaf that says eco-friendly. Just because it has a leaf on it doesn't mean that it is compostable. But yeah, so there's a lot going on. Yeah, microwave safe is on there. So to keep things simple, if it looks and feels and acts like plastics, don't compost it. Definitely not at home, and probably not industrially unless you're sure that it's a compostable plastic. So really you want to be looking for these. This one's, you're going to see this probably more now that you're aware of the BPI compost. Yes?
Are these slides someplace where I can access them?
I can send them to you guys. And if not, they're definitely on the YouTube video. And I can send them, I'll send them to the library and they can, but right now, no.
We'll post it when we put the recording, we can post it. Great.
Yeah. So, and if you give me your direct email, I can also email it to you at some point. Yeah. So compostable packaging, they present a lot of issues, not just for composting, but also recycling facilities. So a quote that kind of puts it into perspective is the only distinguishing factor is how they're made, not how they perform or how long they last in the environment. So composting facilities often can't distinguish them from regular plastics unless they're sitting in a pile and the plastic's been there for years and the compostable ones have biodegraded. So if it's truly compostable, it's okay to put into your compost. Otherwise, we say don't put it in. And then recycling facilities can have a hard time distinguishing them from PET. So compostable plastic looks a lot like PET, which is a #1 plastic, same stuff soda bottles and water bottles is made of. So visually, the resemblance can make it challenging for separation in a recycling facility. They do not act similarly once they're being melted down. They have very different boiling points. So when you're melting down PET and you have compostable ware, it's not going to act the same during the recycling process. And yeah, so they'll typically end up being contamination to the recycling process, which is unfortunate. So just be aware when purchasing those types of materials. I will always say, if you're looking for compostables still better than regular plastic, right? We don't want tons of plastic out there, but when purchasing compostables, if you could opt instead of a plastic one, opt for a paper one. These are gonna absorb more of that food and yucky waste in a compost bin and act more like food, where they can actually break down far better than you put a piece of paper or a paper cup or something in a food pile. It's going to start breaking down just in there from saturating with all of that liquid, rather than the plastic one that's going to take those high heats to start breaking down. So same with silverware, bamboo's better. That's another alternative to compostable plastic silverware or PLA. They have like wooden plates or paper plates that are compostable. So these kinds of options rather than a compostable plastic, we always say are better. Same if it goes to the anaerobic digestion process, right? If you have a PLA plastic that goes to that anaerobic digester and goes through a depackaging process and acts like packaging, it's probably just going to end up in the packaging pile, right? It's not going to end up in the food. So even though they might be able to accept them at an anaerobic digester, they might get caught up in the depackaging process if they haven't broken down at all. So that's also a challenge. But food scrap drop-off sites near you, there's the 10 Village Square, that's near the entrance to the North Yarmouth Town office, so that one's a great one. Falmouth Community Parks, Village Park in Falmouth next to Walmart and Casco Bay Ice Arena, and then there's curbside service available with Garbage to Garden in Cumberland, I believe. So these are all great options. Anyone not live in Cumberland, North Yarmouth? Here, everyone's residents? Great. Otherwise, backyard, right? The average US citizen contributes about 219 pounds of food every year to a landfill. So this is all material that we can keep out individually by just sorting out that food scrap material. If you need a bin that you can keep food scraps in just in your kitchen, just a countertop bin with a lid, we do have those at EcoMaine, so you can reach out to me directly on my email, and you can pick up a compost bucket. I might even be able to drop some off at the library if this is more convenient for people. So, yeah, with that being said, any questions that you guys have? Yeah? Mm-hmm.
I have 4 old feather pillows.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to do with the feathers.
The feathers.
If there's any way to...
Can't say I've ever gotten that one. That makes a lot of sense, though. Anyone have any take on that one?
I would ask one of the places that refills pillows and ask them if they have a process for cleaning and reusing,
Yeah.
repurposing.
'Cause
Just, I've had pillows refilled before, so I know that there's there are companies that do that.
Yeah.
Are they in the air?
I dropped it off at a local place. It was so long ago, I can't remember exactly, but I dropped it off locally.
Yeah, because I don't know if they can go in the compost. I would probably say no, just because they had to have gone through a pretty significant chemical process, I imagine, to be put in used as for pillows. I bet they were bleached and stuff.
I
So
called Garbage to Garden and they said no.
probably it's not
They said maybe
doing.
1 or 2 feathers.
Yeah.
That's about it. They didn't want anything.
I would say maybe if they were feathers from a chicken coop, those would probably be fine. But I imagine if they've been put into a pillow, I've never even thought about that. So great, yes.
Maybe the Humane Society for
Yeah,
dogs.
potentially. I don't. Do they take feather
take
pillows?
Blanket.
They take blankets and stuff.
Yes.
I know the Mid-Coast Humane would not, a shelter at Mid-Coast Humane would not take those.
Just because I feel like it could potentially present a hazard to having feathers.
And they
Rip
have
it
to be-
open.
They have to be laundered, so they have to be mindful
I
of
think you
They-
can also look at Maine Gear Exchange. They used to be up in Freeport, I think they moved, but they take in camping equipment and gear and that's been used and then sort of loan it out or resell it and, for sleeping bags
Yeah.
and things like that might have already had some tears and also
Refilling.
some that are down, they might be able to use that as a refill opportunity. I mean, that's more a clothing
makes a lot of
thing. You gotta
sense,
go to Goodwill or something like
Mhm.
that, I would think, than
The only thing is, I don't think Goodwill takes bedding. I believe that they're
that.
not.
I think they tear them pretty strict.
I don't think there's a law against mattresses and stuff. They're strict on that stuff. I don't know, but I think Gear Exchange makes a lot of sense to use the feathers.
Yeah,
though.
it's a replacement.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Mhm.
How often, for your backyard compost, how often do you recommend turning?
I've been told once a week should be good.
Once a week?
Once a week.
I was doing twice a year.
Yeah. A lot of people do twice a year, I think. And I think it's just a light turn once a week rather than a huge full pile turnover. I think if you just maintain a light compost, and I believe it's the same with turning. How often are you for those using a tumbler? When you remember, yeah. Once again, yeah, I would say once again though, overthinking it can be a lot. So trying to keep some.
Yeah, because with the tumbler, it's probably because it's probably too wet or probably more brown or something. But yeah, I feel like maybe I was overturning it and I just ended up with like balls, probably. Maybe I was.
It wasn't.
probably-
Yeah, it needed to
So then I
sit
had it,
longer.
Like semi, like kind of composted, but not like all the way, and like all these little balls.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. If it's clumping up like that and it's not, yeah, you probably have to let it. It could be too wet, but also you might have to let it sit for a second and break down because you can't overturn it and it gets too dry as well where things aren't breaking up. So it's kind of just knowing your pile, which can be tricky. How's your pile doing? That's the other thing because maybe two turns a year could be okay for you.
I end up having to go on a 2-year cycle to really get down to dirt. So
Yeah.
maybe if I turn it.
If you
once a
turn
week-
it more, you might be able to get it to break down faster.
Okay.
Even once a month, I would say, would be better. Maybe just once a month and see how that goes, and if it needs to, you can pick it up. Yeah.
So if you have a tumbler, I mean, I don't have one, if you have a tumbler, like, do you stop putting material in at some point?
Yeah, it does have. I mean, it has a maximum at some point, so it's not continuous that you can. So you have to take out the dirt from it. Is my understanding.
I don't know if they all are like this, but mine has two compartments.
Oh,
So,
okay.
it's there, you have one compartment that's sort of sitting and waiting it's finishing,
Yeah.
essentially.
Mhm.
And then you have one compartment that you're actively adding to. And then you can swap it. You can say this one's full,
Full.
this compartment's full, so I'm gonna let that one sit.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna empty this compartment, cause that one's done,
Okay,
and then I'm gonna start adding to it.
to the one that's done, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
When do you know when it's done? Is it actually fully dirt, or
It's-
is it okay to move it sooner than that?
Yeah, you're gonna know it's done when it's visually dirt, basically. You can also get it tested. So if you want to look into nutrients and what's actually, how it looks, the breakdown of it, you can get your soil tested. You can send in samples.
I would like to, I know you mentioned this, but I would just like to put a plug in for vermicomposting, which is, I do both, and I love vermicomposting. I think it's great. The product is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's very simple, and it's, the size of a bin, and you can keep it inside, so in the wintertime, you don't have to trudge out to your
Yeah.
compost pile. So it's a great process, and we had somebody come to talk about worm composting a couple of years ago, and we would be happy to have them back. So if you're interested in that, let me know, and I'd be happy to arrange something to do that again.
Yeah. A lot of people like using it. They'll put it in their garage or their basement.
Yeah,
It's
it's great.
much simpler.
It's great, and it's a
not
great,
as messy.
The milk castings are a great product, really,
Yeah.
so.
Any other questions?
I have a question on, because I've done worm composting in the past, but can you do mealworms? Because they're so darn expensive and.
Yeah, I don't think so, but I'm not an expert. Do you?
I think it has to be earthworms. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, there are certain kinds of worms, like red wiggler worms, and there are certain types of worms that are best for worm composting. I don't think mealworms are.
Well,
No, but if you do yard composting, you get a ton of grubs, and birds love them just as much as mealworms. When you turn it, you'll find lots of grubs in your yard compost. And
so I can feed those to the.
the birds love them just like mealworms.
There was an article, I can't remember which organization put it out, but to be careful not to put jumping worms. Which are, the invasive, not invasive species, yeah. And a lot of people sell them online because they're so cheap. So beware that you don't add to that importation. That's very invasive.
Good tip on that one. Any other questions, comments? Yeah?
Hannaford uses AgriCycle.
Yes.
Does Shaw's as well?
I'm not positive that Shaw's is. I believe Whole Foods does, Hannaford. I'm not convinced. I don't know. I haven't seen. They might. I haven't looked into it. I just know that Hannaford is an active partner in their sustainability program with AgriCycle. That's a good question. It's open to them if they were willing, if they wanted to do it.
And is that the kind of facility they're proposing in Brunswick?
I don't.
Biodigest?
I don't think it was for organics, food organics. I think I'm not positive about it, but I don't believe that it's specifically for organic, like food scraps. It might be for. I feel like that one was for. I should know more about this because I live up in that area too. But I think that one might have been for. What is it? Is it wastewater, maybe? Something to do with, I'm not positive. Don't even take my word for that. I have no clue. But I don't believe it's food scraps because I think this is the only one doing it for food scraps right now. Any other, yes?
You may know more about this, but is it Bristol Seafood that is doing fish processing that involves stripping the meat off the fish bones and providing that? I heard this at a
This is
meeting.
fascinating. Fascinating. I don't know this.
A fish processing place in Portland that takes the remainder of fish, meat, flesh off the bones and grinds it up and sends around that bone and the meat to feed animals, dogs and cats to be animal food. So another good
Yeah.
company to support.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's a lot of, yeah.
I just had a thought on the feathers. Might
Okay.
all cuddle down, because I think they need to feather recycling, maybe of their own product, but I don't know for sure, but it's a thought.
Huh.
I will write it down. Yeah.
I love this community sourced.
I know. Well, in this whole, I didn't know that was happening at Bristol Seafood either. That's great. There's a lot of great programs. I also know that there's a company that's making like skincare and other beauty products out of lobster shells. They're using the marine like glycoproteins, and I think they're using the lobster shells from one of the wharfs in Portland. So kind of neat. Yeah. All right. Great. All right. I'll let you guys all get back to your composting in your gardens. It's Saturday.